Next month, we have the amazing Brian Julius, who his knowledge is just outstanding. And I've asked him to do a session for us on DAX and time intelligence and using the offset table. And he's actually built in a little bit about how if you have to use a specific company date table, how you can embed this and use this and still use offsets. So I think, Anthony, that will be of use for you as well. And then we have the lovely dynamic Alan Murray, who is coming down to Saltash, and I'm going to see if we can get it recorded so that you guys that are not in Devon and Cornwall can join in as well. And he's going to be presenting on unlocking synergy between Power BI and Microsoft Excel. Then at the beginning of December, Wyn Hopkins from Australia is going to be running a session for us all about how we use ChatGPT in Power BI and Excel. And then I'm so excited about this as well. Chris Webb is coming to Cornwall with Laura GB, and Chris hasn't told me what he's going to do yet, but I don't mind because it's Chris Webb. He can do whatever he wants to do. And Laura is going to be talking about Power Automate and Power BI. And then we have the amazing Christian, who is going to be showing us how we can catch errors using Power Query within Power BI and Excel. I do have Melissa DeCourt lined up and Alex Powers as well, but I thought that those are enough to get you started. Any questions so far? All good? So what I thought I would start off with is a little bit of Power Query. So let me pull this over here. What I do in my day job, but not preparing for this, is I basically work for different businesses, and I spend probably about 80% of my time combining and building data models so that we can report on various business insights. So part of that, as I've progressed as a developer, is understanding that people are not necessarily the best source of data input, particularly if there isn't data validation, and therefore sometimes we need to try and make our queries as robust as possible. So I'm just going to cover some tips and techniques that I use for renaming and selecting columns, then a little bit about merging tables, possibly merging tables, depending how we get on. Then I'm going to pass over to Henrique, who will talk about Power BI documentation. I have a feeling I might not be able to do query folding today, but if I can't, I'll do it another day. And then I want to talk about resources and how we can learn as we move forward as Power BI developers. So, Power Query. And please do jump in or do chat or do, you know, I like being heckled because otherwise I feel very alone out here. So business problem number one. I don't know about you, but I am continually having to append files together into one table. It can be snapshots of data, so I might have an API which we might take a snapshot at the beginning of each month or the beginning of each week, and then to give us a historical trend, we want to append these files all into one table to allow us to then look at trends over the month or over the year. It can be data from different sources, so quite often, sometimes it might be that we'll have data coming in from a legacy and we want to include it into a new data source system. But there are many times that I have to append files together into one table. Why do we have to? And this is where we go back to our data model. It's much better to have one long table than to have several small tables. When we have tables together as one long table, it enables the Vertipack engine, which is the engine within Power Query or within Power BI analysis services, to work. And it works better on long columns where it can actually compress the data depending upon the cardinality, the number of different fields or types of entries within that field. I won't go too heavily into Vertipack, but again, if it's something you're interested in, and at the end I've got a questionnaire for you to fill in, then that's something that we can have a specific meeting on to look at Vertipack and how Vertipack works, because it really helps you understand why you model and you build in a certain way. We're always told it needs to be a star schema, but when you understand the Vertipack engine, then that helps you understand the reasons why and why things can be speedy. So when I talk about a star schema, what I'm talking about is something like this. And apologies if this is not new to you, but it's so important, I thought it was worth reiterating. So a star schema in Power BI terms is when your data model is at, in database terms, 1NF. So that means it's at the first level of normalization. So by the first level of normalization, it means that our tables, you would have tables of full name, tables of agenda. It's all there, and it's not broken out into, so here we've got birth year and we've got birth date there. There isn't a separate table for a birth year. So we have our first level of normalization. We have our date table as a dimension table, and that date then enables us to filter all of our different fact tables. So we're able to, you can see this is for training, we're able to filter by date on perhaps some, different things like marathon training or sleep or activities or whatever it is that you're particularly interested in. So this then comes to the crux of how do we actually do this? Can everyone, let me just make this a bit bigger. So hopefully, that's not too big. Hopefully you can see okay. I can always make it a little bit bigger. So in here, brilliant, thanks Jordan. You can have your manage parameter. So what I've brought in is I've brought in a parameter which will store the address that I'm pulling all of my files from, and my files are the Excel files. Oh, I should have mentioned that. Bear with me. So when I say this is our data model, this here are our files. These are the files that we're going to be using. So it's 3 Excel spreadsheets in a folder, and it's an example from this book, which if you haven't read it and you haven't worked through it, I really highly recommend you do. It's absolutely brilliant. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a file parameter for SharePoint, so that if I was to actually change where I store the files or to give it to somebody else, it would be very easy to actually change the parameter. That parameter is fed into my SharePoint query, and that SharePoint query then is set up and feeds all of these other queries. This is a really useful tool in here. If you haven't clicked on View and Query Dependencies, it's incredibly useful for you to understand where your queries and where your files are and which file is feeding which file. So we can look here, and particularly if you're trying to clean up or you're trying to understand, you can click on it and you can see the path that is actually, so that's the parameter, that's the source, and this is the query that's then feeding these different reports. This is great when it's a small model. What I think would be particularly useful would be the ability to have tabs so that you can actually pull in different tables and see how they feed each other, and almost have like subsections like we do in the data modeling. That would be particularly useful. So once we pull in our SharePoint query, so this is basically just pointing at SharePoint to say, bring in these 3 files. So once we bring in these 3 files, and we'll start from the beginning. So here I'm referencing the SharePoint query. So I'm making it really nice and simple to reference the SharePoint query. From referencing the SharePoint query, I'm feeding through, and I've just said all I want is this particular subfolder, which is called Chapter 3, Episode 3, Products. And I want these 3 things out of it. So I want to be able to say for each table that I pull in, what year that they relate to. And if we look, just pull along, you can actually see the columns and see the data about them. So now what I'm doing, and I won't do this because we haven't got a huge amount of time, but please, if any of this isn't familiar to anyone, please ask, and then I can repeat and I can show you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the transform tab up here to extract, and you can click on extract, and I can extract the text after the delimiter. So what that means is I can split this up, because we can see there's a pattern here where we've got space and then a hyphen and then another space, and then we've got the .xlsx. So I've extracted the text after that first space. So you can see here, I've got the first space. So I extract the text, second space, because I've said ignore the first one. And you can do this if you click on the little settings bar. You can actually say how many spaces you want. So you can say from the start of the input or from the end of the input and the number of delimiters to skip. So that enables you to really be very, very clear about exactly what you want to pull out. We can then extract the text after our next delimiter. So we can say for each row, so for what we're writing here is each text before delimiter, the little underscore is the row. So we're saying for each row, what I want to have is the text before the full stop. So that then leads us to only bring out the 2016, 2017, 2015. It's a bit similar to programming. I've seen Brian's joined us. If you use regex can enable you to pull out specific patterns. So it enables you to actually look at a pattern and then pull out exactly what you want it to see. And then what sometimes you'll see is you'll be encouraged to double click on the combined files, and what that will do is that will bring in a so if I just, one thing I do all the time is I duplicate. So if I'm trying to problem solve, I always duplicate, because that way I can play with my table and I can see what happens if I'm going to do something, and if I make a mistake, which is very rare of course, then I can get my content back. So what we can do is we can click on the expand, and that would then dynamically set up almost like a template for us, which will then do the binary and combine all the files. So if I click that, you'll see it will expand and it'll evaluate the query. And then what it does is it then will establish a connection to the workbook, and it pulls in specific references that it will then to give you sort of almost like a template file. Oh, can't do it. This will teach, there we go. So this will teach me to go off the cuff. So what it will do is it'll ask me for the parameter so I can pick the sheet. But rather than mess with all of that, what I prefer to do is I prefer to add a custom column. So what you can do is you can add a column. So we have transform, where we can actually transform our data, but we can add a column. So adding a column enables us to make changes to the data that is within our column. So what I'm going to do is add a custom column, and I'll just show you how you write it. So excel.workbook. And interestingly, quite often it'll do the 2 dots for you if you tend to write it in. But if you do dot and do workbook, and then press tab, it helps you get past that, because sometimes it'll put the two things in with you. So you do excel.workbook and then content, and then you can write it in. Now, I know this because I use it all the time, but if you're not sure, then you can ask, or you can look on Google, or you can use ChatGPT, and you can actually put in what you want for it to look up. So once I've added my custom and I've brought in my content, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my columns. Personally, again, rather than remove, yeah, I know it's very frustrating. But if you put the dot and start writing the last bit, it will put it in for you. I prefer select columns, because what you can do when you click on your home, you can choose or you can remove. If you choose to select your columns, so if we click here, select columns, it's really handy because you can always go back and add your columns in. It's much more tricky to actually, if you remove columns, to then go back and actually add columns in. So I always use select columns. And what I've done there is I've actually renamed it. So you can click on a step and you can right click and you can click properties, and then you can change the name of your steps. And I like to change the names of my steps so that I can see what they are. Some things obviously you don't, depending upon what it is, but actually when you're flicking through visually, it can be very handy to actually write step properties and change the select columns, or you can write notes. But we're going to talk more about this in a little bit, which will then give you the information. So it comes up with a little I, which is useful because you can put it things to remind yourself, but it's also, you have to hover over it. So you'll see here, and this is one of my favorite things, allows you to, oh yeah, good point, Nicole, you can press F2. So if we press F2, a bit like in Excel, and that will help you rename. If you click in table, so we've got table here, which is an object, and within every cell within Power Query, you can have different things. You can have objects, you can have text, you can have records, you can have lists, you can have tables, so you can have many, many different things. But if you actually click in the cell itself, it gives you a visualization of what's hidden within there. And that can be really helpful when you're trying to understand what's happening with your model. So I find this quite useful, particularly if you think, right, I want to expand this. Are they all the same? You can just have a quick look. And then what we've done here is we've expanded. So we've clicked on this button here and we've expanded our data, and we've pulled out our data tab. Now, this you have to do in Excel because of the way that Excel is put together, but you don't actually have to do in a CSV file. So this is our starting point. And from here, I'm going to show you 3 different ways of which you can actually extract the data, because I do this all of the time. And sometimes it just, when I first started using Power Query, I would do it this way. So you look at your tables and you want to press these 3 dots. So you press the 3 dots and you get this, which is all of the column names. I usually always take the column name off as a prefix, although sometimes it can be quite handy to have, because if you're combining different tables and you really want to see the difference between 2 things, then sometimes I will leave it on. But once we expand it like this, then we end up with a hard-coded piece of code. So we've got a table.expand table column. We've got our source. Now the source, again, apologies if I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but because of the way that Power Query works, every single step is a table. And that table doesn't necessarily have to be the table linking behind it. It can be any particular step in the table. So every step in the table creates a table, and you can jump back and forth and actually pull different tables in. Whether you should or not depends upon who you're writing your queries for. So we have table.expand table column, and we're pulling in our table. And what we're saying is we want to expand this column data. And you can see it's column. So what we're saying is table, column, and then we're saying, and this, because it's in two curly brackets, is a list. Is it saying table, column, I want a list of these headings, and I want to call them these headings. And that expands your data for you, and it works brilliantly. However, if a column name changes, or you have more columns or less columns, then it can actually break. Let me just share, and I will share this code with you. It's something that Melissa DeCote produced, which I just love, and I will show you this. So in it, if I click on table, you can scroll down and you can say expand table function, and see I'm clicking in the cell, and then that gives me within my Power BI report the function. So it tells me, right, within this function I need the table, I need the column as text, so within the speech marks, and then I need the column names as a list. And I can have, if I want, it's optional, I can leave it in or I can put it out. I can put new column names if I want to put in, and we will do that in shortly. So this is our hard-coded table expand, which works, and it's brilliant unless until your data changes. The next step I want to do, is there any questions so far, or all quite okay with that? All good. So this one, thank you, Nicole. So this one, what I'm going to do is just to show you how to make it dynamic. So what we're going to do, instead of actually hard coding in all of this, column 1 to column 10, we're actually going to get Power Query to do it for us. So if we click in source, we've come back to this Dynamics expand folder source. So all I'm doing is I'm referencing this, and then this is just brilliant, is I'm pulling in table.column names. No problem, Remo. It's lovely to meet you, and hopefully see you at the next one and understand completely. Table.column names is where we're pulling the source, which is our table. Then we're saying data, which is our data column. Interestingly, this isn't in speech marks. So if we go back to our table.column names, so table functions, and we go to our table.column names, and then we look at the function, it will tell us what we want. So within table.column names, it wants a table from the record. So it just tells us table column names and table. It just wants the actual return the column names of the table. So what we're doing by using that square is we're drilling down into that table, that column, that row. So here, and this goes back to our arrays. So it's this table, that column, and the first row of that particular table. And if we click in the table, that is our first row. And you need to remember that Power Query is 0 indexed. So R is 0 indexed and Python is 1 indexed, and that means where they start counting from. So from here, it starts counting at 0. Power Query starts counting at 0. It's the same way as thinking Power Query is case sensitive and DAX isn't. So it's these things that you just have to remember. So here we have our table column names, and Jordan will remember me going on about this. So this is our table. This is our column, and this is the row within that first column. So it's it's a way that you can identify within a matrix or a table of a specific point, a specific row. So that's the first row within that column of that table. Now, interestingly, note this is coming back to source, But when you click on expand table name, I'm ignoring this. I'm saying I want to expand our table column name and I want this table. I don't have to have that one. Just because it's in front of it, it doesn't mean that I have to use it. So I'm going to use source. And within source, exactly the same as we did before, I want data, but that data I want from that table. And then col names, if you look at col names, it's a list. So we're actually creating table.column names is a list. So instead of actually putting in a list, we've created our list within this step of Power Query and we're pulling it in. So it makes your code quite nice and easy to be able to use and to look. So we're just saying, okay, within this, I want source data and I want column names. I haven't put in a column name. I've literally just left it because it said it's optional. But what I wanted to show you is just one more thing, and then we'll go on to the error type, and then I'll hand over to Henrique. So I can put anything I want in there, and I can call these columns anything that I want to call them, as long as it is the same number that I bring in. So there are, and this is a Blue Peter style, this is a list that I've produced earlier. So all you do to produce a list is type equals, and then the curly brackets denote a list. And so you could have from, I can see there's 10 of them. So you could do 1.10, and then that would give you 10. Or you could do A to Z, and that would give you 26. And it's working on Unicode to be able to, oh, I don't know if that'll work actually. We could try it, but I think I can try too many things on my first one. So that is a list from A to J, and we can see that that is the list there. So what if we wanted to do here, we could say, well, let's just, because it's a list and our optional list was another list, so we could do alphabet. And can anyone guess what's going to happen? So it changes. So it just really nicely says, let's change all of these to be the alphabet. Yeah, Nicar, A to B. But what you can do is you can use list.zip, where you can actually zip up two names and you can rename them together. And it's a really nice, straightforward, simple way to do it. Hi, Fernando. So I thought that was quite fun to show you. So we'll go through this again. Just one more thing, and then I will just hand over to Henrique, and then I will do a little bit more after. So we're starting source, but this time I'm just going to show you a little bit about error capturing. So we're doing the same thing. We're expanding the data. It's a little bit more complex this time because I've just said I want to keep all of the table. I put my table.column names in here. And because I've got the table.column names in here, I just want to remove any that if they're called name, they would be the same because I've got a name there, but we're not using that one at the moment. But it's the way that you can actually embed different things within each other. And sometimes, you know, it can be nice to have lots of code within, but it depends upon who's using it and readability for your users and whoever's going to take on the report. So now we're starting to promote our headers, which is what you've seen before. Now, what I want to do here is I want to change this first row to be called year. I don't want it to be called 2016. And if I hard code it in, then if the order changes or another file comes in, it can actually then break my query. So in this case, what you can do is we can do a rename columns using table.column name. So if we go back to our shared and we go back to our table functions, we've got our table rename columns. So if you click on the function there, and pull it up. So what it says, table.rename columns, and it'll tell you what you have to put into it to make it actually work. So this function requires a table, and then it wants the renames as a list, and then optional missing field as nullable. So that tells you what to do if there's a missing field. So if we go back to this one, so what I've done is I've renamed the columns. The table that I'm using is promoted headers, which is the step above it because it's a table. And then my list, and you can see the curly brackets embed the list. Excuse me. My table.column names, promoted headers, and the first row. So that's my table here, and it's the first row that I want. And then I want to replace it with that first actual column, this one, 0, because it's 0 index. So table.column names, it's that particular table here, and I want the first column, which is 0. So I'm saying rename the columns of that table, the first column, which is this one, and rename it year. And I use this quite a lot if you're actually pulling in data that could change and it's being added to it. So this is particularly useful. And then from here, because there are 3 tables that are being appended on top of each other, each of these 3 tables, if we look at them, each of these 3 tables had a header row. So what you have to do is you have to remember to get rid of that header row. Otherwise, it'll break your query, particularly if you've got the header row as text and the data within your column is a number. That will stop your change type and it'll break it. So you always have to remember to get rid of those column headers. And what I try and do is I go for a column where it's going to be quite easy for me to pick out weight, so that's, or I might choose color because it's a categorical, so you can see quite easily that I can pull out the color from there. And that then gets rid of your header row, so they'll sit on top of each other and your data types will be the same. Now, what I've done is right at the end, I've changed the type. Now, 2 things that to remember here, or one thing particularly, 2 things. Well, I try and change my type right at the end. I don't like it. Sometimes when you pull things in, Power Query will do it for you, and I want to dictate what type I have. So I try to do it at the end, but if I have transformations, then sometimes I need to do it sooner. The other thing is, sometimes when you actually add a column, you can put the type at the end. So you can say add column and you can specify the type. That doesn't actually go back and check everything in the column. You need to do a change type at the end because it then looks at everything that is in the Vertipack engine. At the moment, we've got the top 1000 rows. When we change the type, it then checks to see in that whole column, is that change type correct? And you can see here within size, I've got some errors. And I remember when I first started thinking, why would you keep the errors? I don't understand that. But it's really, really useful to keep the errors to understand what the problem is. So on this next step, you've got up here, keep errors. So if you click on keep errors, it will only keep the errors. And this is where it's useful just to click on the error, and it should show you what the problem is. So if you click in it, it'll tell you there's a data format area. We couldn't convert it to a number, and that's because it's an M, it's a medium. So what the engine has done here is it's tried to dictate for us. It's tried to detect what it should be, and it can see it's mainly numbers, but actually there is an M there. So it's then said, no, I can't do it when it comes back. And sometimes I'll keep these in, or I'll publish it to put into my report to show my customer, or just to highlight to them what some of the issues with the data quality is, because this doesn't have to be kept. So I've done a change type correct, but you'll notice that what I've done is I've ignored these two steps. And the step that I'm using is this remove table headers. So I've gone back to it, and I've actually put size as a type text, because I have to have it text because I've got text and numbers in it, and I don't know what they want to do. Once I speak to them, then I would know what they want to do. But I've kept it there with a note so that I can refer to the customer, or I would publish to the report to refer to the customer. And that's why it's quite useful to have this functional programming where you can move from one step to the next step. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Henrique, because I'd like Henrique to share with you some of the discussions that we've had about how you then capture the purpose of your queries. So if there are no more questions for me, and if you're okay, Henrique, what I'll do is I'll stop sharing and let you carry on. Is that okay?
I'm ready.
You're ready.
You can
Born ready.
Yeah, that's great. I'll try to share my screen.
Okay.
I'm quite starstruck in this forum. I can see that Alan Murray, 100,000 viewers, and Brian Julius in there, and I connected as a newbie to Sue without knowing that she was a data goddess. But we've had some good talks, and I have something I'd like to share with you. I'm not that experienced making these talks. Actually, I think I've only made this one. So, but that's a first time for everything. So the thing I'd like to share with you is documentation, a best practice that I have made up for myself. And I work with Power Query for some years now, and the latest best practice I have developed here is just 1 or 2 weeks old, so it develops all the time. But I use a lot of times trying to make documentation as easy and so good as possible. And I thought about, why do I spend I can see I use more time on that than the average person. And why do I do that? I do that because I only learn something by learning and relearning. And then on a personal basis, I found out that I just hate looking for things that I found before. So I think that's why I put a lot of effort into it. I've made my little talk points visible here, so I can remember what to say. And also so that if you should revisit the video, it will be easy to find the spots to revisit it or to skip the points. So the first thing I'll say is that I also, like Sue showed, do a lot of effort to group my queries so they sit together in a well-defined way. And I also use the query dependency view. But when it comes, it's looking something like this, that you have so many queries and functions and parameters and so forth, and it looks like this. I don't get the perfect overview by looking at these things. So I think I have to do something more to find out what's going on and find out why did I do the things that I did. Why did I make this query? What was the purpose of it? What was the method that I used when I made it? So what I'm gonna run through is I'll try to make a quick demo, creating a new report. Maybe you can also use that as a tip with some easy test data I've actually been quite fond of using. I'll create some tables. I'll show you how the comments can be used in Power Query out of the box, how it's thought to be. And here is my at the moment best practice. It's putting the comments in as step 1, and then I'll also show you how you can put comments in the other step, not the default way, but in another little tricky way. And then I'll try to show you, not that I'm using it so much, but I'm sure I'll use it more and more, that you can use an extension called Power BI Site Tools, where you can get an overview of all your M code and actually also all your DAX code. So I'll make a quick new report now and use some nice fast test data and rename it to test data and go on from there. I have a totally empty Power BI file here. And the thing, it's been a long time before I clicked on this button, but it's actually very nice. It's just one table. And very much of the things that you want to test and to show can easily be done on one table. The most simple data model that you can make is just made up of one table. So it has some financial data that I'll load, and I'll just call this test data.
Don't forget to do your Control-Shift+, Henry.
Yeah, sure. So we can zoom in. And then I'll say, just like Sue also did, don't enable load on the first staging query. That is, that it'll be used in the Power Query, but not used in the report. And then as the next step, I'll make a fact table and two-dimension table and show you a little tip about right-clicking. So I'll right-click on this one, make a reference, and say that this will be my fact table. And then I'll do the same one more time. Reference, say this will be my product table. And make one more. This will be my country table. Okay. So let's say the products here. I'll just make a few steps to have something to make notes on. So here I'll say remove all the columns. Actually, it's doing the best practice. It's actually selecting. So it's a select step. I'll right-click that one and remove duplicates. Then maybe change the type to text. Then I have some steps. Go into country, do the same, remove all the columns, remove duplicates, make it text, and maybe go into facts here and say I want some of the columns. That's my fact table, maybe in my segment, country, product, units sold, sales price, discount, and the date. Maybe I want to step before here and say I know there's some data here from 2013 and 14. Maybe I only want 14. Right-click that and say filter on 14. Yes, please, another step. So I have another step here. And select all and transform detect data type. I also usually take that as the last step. So the first thing I'll do is actually also inspiration from Sue. I have spent a lot of time renaming these to something meaningful because I thought this would give me the overview. But now the only thing I do is that I write filter number 1. And this one, the only thing I write here is select number 1 and then change type. Because when I say filter here, and a best practice if you don't do it, on the view as default, you don't see the formula bar. Just go on the view formula bar and then you can see it. And if you're new to Power Query, this looks difficult. But after some time, you'll start using these formula bars and the advanced editor to make some transformations directly in there. And as you can click on the and just the information that I have filtered something and I click on it, I can see it with the red text here. This hard coded I've filtered on 2014. So instead of writing in this here, maybe before, this was an example I would write here, I have filtered on 2014. And then I change the filter, and then this is too old. So now I write it very, very short over here. So let's do the same with product. I'll just write select 01. And then I'll write everything. What do you call this in English? I forget it. Bydemåde hedder det på dansk.
You can put it in Danish. Yeah.
I guess you can figure it out when I do this. So I write remove duplicate, something that you tell you to do. these are not the best example, but a lot of other examples, you'll make these descriptions as short as possible if you write it in this type. So let's do this, the last one. I'll select one, remove duplicates. And again, I don't remove very many characters here, but a lot of other times when you write in this way of expression, it's you keep it short and easier to read. Okay, so that'll be the first steps. And then comments out of the box. Well, you can. The tip over here was if you're. Please use the right click. So if you want to go into the advanced editor, just right click and choose advanced editor here. Right click advanced editor. I have spent so much time looking for this little advanced editor here, or click over on view and advanced editor, or being somewhere here and going to home and finding it. Just use the right click and go to advanced editor. That's far more easy. So yeah. Like you also did, Sue, I often use this duplicate to show something. So now I'll show how I'm not using the comments. So the comments out of the box is the possibility to click on this all properties. And then if I just write test 01 here, then I can write a general description of what this query is about. And then you can also write at the every step here, you can right click properties and you can write other notes here. We write one more. So that was a very nice thing when they made that, was they're showing these icons. Oh, there's some documentation here. But when it gets bigger, it's quite annoying to have to hover over these. And also, this one has no explanation that there's an documentation. And also, if these texts get long, it's quite difficult to read. Let me see if I can make an example here. Shoot in some text. So if I hover over this, this is not very easy to read. So that's not what I'm doing. That I have done some before, but now I'm doing comments as step number 1. So I go into the advanced editor, and like Sue said, the steps they don't have to be used. So the little trick that I'm doing here is that I'm writing purpose here. And then I'm writing equal and just making parentheses and comments, and then you can write your text in here. So shooting out some text here, and done. And just forgot a little comma here. I have to end with a comma. So the first step I have here is called purpose. The second step is called source, and that's being used in the next step. This step is called filter. This is being used in the next step. This is called change type, and so forth. This purpose doesn't get used any other places than here. And the nice thing about that is that I keep every step. I use that as a explanation of what is going on here. So right-click Advanced Editor. You can do it like that. So what I'm doing now is I have something to shoot out some a standard way to write it. So I just do it like this. So it's the same as before, just purpose and just a parenthesis start and this sign for texts, and ending with this and a comma. And then in here I can write everything. So I'll usually write it here. Let's say I have some steps for the purpose. And then I also mentioned what are the key methods. You maybe have 15 steps in this query, but you maybe be able to write it with 5 lines here to say what are, maybe I'm joining with 2 other tables and I'm doing some moving duplicates and so forth. But you don't have to write comments on every step, because a lot of them will be easy to understand. You're filtering something, you're selecting something. But what was the overall purpose? What was the most important methods that you use? And maybe also an explanation of why you chose those methods. So I've also seen these and have been very excited about the ChatGPT possibility to, shoot in comments on every step. But I think this is a better way to go, because the ChatGPT comments does not explain why you did it this way. It's explaining what is going on. And the thing I think is that even though that it looks good and it gives good explanation, ChatGPT, you're not sure who's going to read that, because maybe it's far more text than the one who's going to read it needs, because he's an experienced guy, and then it's just cumbersome to read it. And then also, if 1 year is passing and at that time he's going to need an explanation, maybe ChatGPT will give an even better explanation at that time, so he can himself shoot this text into ChatGPT. So I think it's much more valuable, yet you're right, what was the purpose of this, and what was the method, and why did you choose those methods? So I will do that on every step here. So I have my little notes here. So just to copy that in, make a step up here, and then write what is your purpose. Create a product. Dimension. Reference. Test data as I have it here. Remove. Duplicate. Now, of course, very simple, but you'll soon experience that the queries become more difficult, and you have to do maybe something like this. So now I can go through every query here and see in the first step a really easy to read description of what is the purpose and what is the methods. Another thing is, if you want to write something specific in the individual step here, you could go in and write a comment here. But what will happen is that when I leave this one, it's on this step, remove duplicates. Go out, it'll disappear. You see it's gone. It's not completely gone because it's in here. You can see the comment in this here. But a little trick here is that you can, if you write it inside the bracket here, it'll not disappear. And that was actually what I did until for 2 weeks ago. I wrote it in here, but this is so very nice that you can run through your individual step, and then you can read it here without going into advanced editor. Of course, you can read everything in the advanced, all the comments, but it often gets overwhelming to read everything. So I like it very much that I can read in the purpose, the methods, and then in the individual step, I can read it here also. So
Henry,
you just have to do it before the parentheses. Yeah.
Brian's just made a really great comment that you could actually use text.contains to do an analysis on the purposes. So if you had a massive report or you wanted to look at what it was doing by using text.contains, it's just something to think about.
Yeah, I have to see that. Sure. The last thing I'll show, the time's also running, but I'm not used to that much. I think it's just brilliant. It's a French guy. I think you'll put it in the chat, Sue.
Yeah.
A link to him. He's made an external tool here called Power BI Site Tools. And as small as it is, just as powerful is it, because it just opens this one, and then you can say files that you want your PBI file here sent out to individual files. You can check out that you wanted to open in Visual Studio Code. And now I say process. It exports all these queries and also your DAX to a folder in Explorer. And then here, when you have ticked it off here, it'll open it in Visual Studio. And then you can go in here and see all your M code. And you color code it as it has to be. So here you can see the purpose that I wrote here. You can see the product here with the purpose here. See the test data. And then you can use a search, and you can search across all your DAX, all your M code. So I think that's a good combination. So that was what I had prepared to share with you. You can use some of it. I'll hand it over to you again, Sue.
Okay, brilliant. Let me just put the chat in for there's a session that Didier did with Reed Haven, which might be something useful to watch. Thank you, Henrique. That was absolutely brilliant, and I'm just so thrilled that we can, that you've had the opportunity to do your first talk, because you've just got so much to offer that it's brilliant to have. So we're getting close to time. And I'm conscious I haven't done everything I wanted to do, but equally I'm conscious that we have more time to be able to do that. So I'd like to try and keep to the hour if possible. I do want to show you the shared resource from Melissa, because this I found was particularly useful, and it's a very small piece of M code, and what it does, see, look, I've used Henrique's purpose, because I just love this. You look at it and it'll tell you exactly what the purpose of the code is, because how many times do we go back to things and you think, why did I do that? And then I go through, I go, oh yeah, I did it that way. I know why I did it that way. Then I can read what I did and I understand what I did, but I can't necessarily remember why. So to have, and I love the why. Why did I do this? And that then jogs your memory. So the ability to use easy lookup Power Query functions. And what Melissa's query does is it takes the hashtag shared. If you use hashtag shared, and I'm not sure that I'll explain it properly, but it actually gives you background into all of the documentation, and there's sections as well. But you then transfer the record to a table. And then I've sorted it, so it all comes into alphabetical order. And then what I've done is, and this is Melissa's brainwave, is you then, for each step, I'm pulling out sort and I'm pulling in the text. And then I'm exact same line of code, but I'm then pulling in table. I'm then looking at list. I'm then looking at date. I'm then looking at logical functions, so that I can. Oh, do you want to, Henrique, put mute on? So you can actually go in between each of the different functions, and the reason I use this quite a lot is for Excel BI's quizzes, which I do not every day, but just such a source of information. And I'm going to share some of the resources, but you can just copy this query into your query or have it as part of your Power BI template. And when you're actually trying to work out how to do something or what is it needs, you can then look at the function and then go through. So this shared is in the advanced editor here. And I wonder whether I'll just be able to put it in chat so that you can use it and pull it out of chat if you want to be able to use it. And it's just absolutely brilliant. So with that in mind, let me go back to the shared is a really good resource, and I hope that you finished today's session having something that will enable you to do one thing. If you come away from this session with just one thing that will make your life a little bit easier, then that makes it worthwhile. So these are some Power Query resources that I use regularly. The datachant.com is Gail Revive, and that's the book I showed you at the beginning of the session. PowerQuery.how is absolutely brilliant. It shows every single function and use of Power Query with examples. It is brilliant. It's from a data platform MVP called Rick, and he's really, really good, BI Gorilla. And then we have PQ Today's Menu, which is Melissa DeCourt's, and she just does 6 or 7 page PDFs on different functions, which is brilliant. Again, business scenarios, challenges, tests. It's an excellent resource. And then the other one, if you like quizzes and puzzles and you find that's the way that you learn, Excel BI, he posts a puzzle every evening, and I try and do them as much as I can because they really do make you think about how you can use Power Query in different ways, and then you can look at other people's solutions and learn from them as well. And once you've had a go yourself, then you can see sometimes the absolute beauty in the solutions that are out there. And you'll see here there's a raffle. So the raffle, unfortunately, was called during the session, but if you either use the QR code or enter the form, then what we're asking for are people that perhaps you might want us to invite onto our sessions that you might want to learn from, and also it will give us an idea of the different topics and skills that you're looking for, which will then help us plan the sessions better. So I hope that you've had a good time and that you've learned something, and please feel free to add any comments. Take care. Bye.